Maxwell Donovan had given 4 decades of his life to Portland National Bank, dedicating every ounce of energy, focus, and intellect to building wealth, stability, and a legacy meant to protect his family. His reputation as a pillar of the institution was unrivaled. Colleagues called him the cornerstone of the investment department, the man whose vision had carried them through recessions, market crashes, and countless economic storms. He had believed, like most do, that loyalty and sacrifice would be met with appreciation. But as he stood in the grand Riverside Plaza ballroom, bathed in the soft golden glow of crystal chandeliers, the truth hit him like a cold wave. He had been betrayed. The air was thick with celebration, glasses clinking, laughter echoing, and praise rolling over him like waves. Yet Maxwell's eyes kept drifting to the reserved table at the front. There sat his family, perfectly poised, draped in designer elegance and concealed intentions. Vivian, his wife, radiated a calm, regal composure, her silver blonde hair immaculately styled, her smile measured, and just a touch too bright. The kind of smile that betrayed the mind working behind the mask of sophistication. Beside her, Natalie, 38, and the image of her mother's sharp ambition, fiddled subtly with her phone, thumb poised over the screen as though the next click could change everything. Preston, 35, wore a smirk that seemed rehearsed, a casual arrogance that belied a deeper, scheming energy, his gaze never quite leaving his father. Something passed silently between the three of them, a flicker of intent, a shared confidence that set Maxwell's instincts on edge. He had spent a lifetime learning to read people, and the calculated tension, the almost imperceptible nods exchanged, spelled a storm he had long feared but never truly imagined arriving. The retirement speeches continued, accolades showered upon him, but Maxwell's smile remained carefully controlled, a mask honed over 40 years of precision and restraint. When the applause finally ebbed and guests began to drift into conversations and photos, he approached the family table, every step measured. Vivian greeted him with warmth that seemed hollow, a practiced touch on his arm that was firm yet performative, as though she were testing the weight of his surrender. "Congratulations, darling," she said, her voice syrupy, but with an undercurrent he could not mistake. Preston's attempt at warmth, "Congratulations, Dad," came out thick and strained, lacking conviction, his eyes briefly flicking to his sister as if to confirm a shared victory. Natalie leaned forward subtly, her expression unreadable, a quiet satisfaction dancing at the edge of her gaze, while Vivian reached into her designer purse and produced a thick manila envelope, sliding it across to Maxwell with a flourish that belied its sinister contents. "A little retirement gift," she said, her tone light, but tainted with cruelty. Maxwell, his face unreadable, stared at the envelope, the chill of premonition creeping over him. Every instinct he had honed through decades of military intelligence and financial strategy warned him that this was no gift, that each paper contained the blade they intended to plunge into his life. The envelope contained neatly arranged legal documents, divorce papers, asset transfer agreements, pension dispersal authorizations, every page demanding his signature. Natalie's phone was now angled toward him, recording with precision, capturing every second of what they assumed would be his submission. Preston's smugness radiated as he leaned back, arms crossed, while Vivian's voice, rehearsed and deceptively tender, invited him to sign and begin a new life unburdened. Each word they spoke was designed to provoke guilt, confusion, compliance, yet Maxwell, trained in observation, patience, and strategy, betrayed nothing. He opened the envelope with deliberate calm, taking in every detail, noting the positioning of stamps, signatures, and authorization blocks. Natalie prompted him with a soft insistence. "Open it," as if he needed permission to witness the culmination of their greed. Maxwell's lips pressed into a straight line, his pulse steady, a storm of controlled fury thrumming beneath the surface. He recognized every tactic: the guilt, the flattery, the illusion of inevitability. He had faced manipulations like this before, though never from the people he trusted most. Slowly, with measured precision, Maxwell reached into his jacket and retrieved his Mont Blanc pen, the very one Vivian had gifted him on their 25th anniversary, the instrument now poised to execute a different kind of plan than they imagined. The soft click of the pen uncapping cut sharply through the quiet of the table, drawing the attention of his family without a single word spoken. Page by page, he signed each document calm and deliberate, the pen gliding across the paper as if performing a ritual they could not comprehend. Every movement was captured by Natalie's phone, yet she could not see the forces at play beyond her greed and vanity. When the last signature was complete, Maxwell returned the pen to his breast pocket, his eyes lifting to meet each of theirs with unwavering composure. "Understood," he said simply, a single word that disguised the complexity of the storm he had long prepared. He adjusted his jacket, a small, elegant gesture, as if the night's tension was nothing more than ceremonial formality. Vivian, Natalie, and Preston assumed victory, believing they had cornered him, unaware that each stroke of the pen had been part of a strategy that had been in motion for 15 years. As he departed the ballroom, the masks of celebration and triumph worn by his family became more grotesque with every step he took. Maxwell Donovan had not merely survived, he had anticipated, measured, and planned. 15 years prior, seated in the dim glow of his home office, he had stumbled upon the betrayal that would define this long arc of patience. A backup of their shared family phone account revealed intimate messages between Vivian and Bernard Holloway, his trusted financial advisor. Casual texts had evolved into explicit plans to strip him of his fortune, secure offshore assets, and manipulate his retirement into surrender. Maxwell's first instinct had been confrontation, a surge of righteous indignation fueled by betrayal, yet decades of disciplined service in military intelligence and high-stakes finance had taught him the value of waiting, observing, and executing with precision, rather than emotion. He had not immediately revealed the affair, nor had he confronted Bernard. Instead, he meticulously documented each interaction, every communication, building encrypted archives of evidence, securing accounts, and establishing financial contingencies beyond the reach of those who plotted against him. Over the ensuing years, Maxwell built an intricate network of shell companies, anonymous trusts, and offshore accounts, transferring income and assets in ways designed to remain invisible even to skilled auditors. Each property purchased, each financial maneuver executed, was a brick in a fortress of preparation. By day, he remained the mild-mannered, dependable banker, the devoted husband whose patience masked the depth of his awareness. By night, he became an archivist, a strategist, meticulously compiling evidence of Vivian and Bernard's schemes and of his children's burgeoning ambitions and duplicities. At family gatherings, he smiled and played the part of the unsuspecting patriarch, noting every word, every glance, storing each detail in the mental ledger that would one day become the blueprint for their undoing. Maxwell had learned that anger is a tool for the impulsive. True mastery of circumstance comes from patience, observation, and the careful timing of actions designed to outmaneuver those who think themselves clever. Each calculated step, each observed weakness, and each financial safeguard was part of a plan that had taken a decade and a half to perfect. By the time his family presented the retirement documents, they were stepping into a trap of Maxwell's own design. Their assumption of control over his life, their smug laughter and confident glares were misjudgments that would cost them everything. What appeared to be submission was, in truth, a turning point. Every signature Maxwell applied that night was a deliberate move in a complex strategy, a move that would soon render his family powerless, stripped of both wealth and credibility. As the evening concluded, Maxwell left the room with the measured grace of a man who had already won, his mind already navigating the next phase of the long game he had orchestrated in silence. Behind the mask of civility, a network of digital, financial, and legal maneuvers lay dormant, awaiting activation at the precise moment when each betrayal and misstep of his family would be revealed in stark, inescapable clarity. The stage was set, the pieces in place, and the first chapter of Maxwell Donovan's ultimate reckoning was about to unfold, silently, but with consequences that would leave no escape, no mitigation, and no illusion of control for those who had sought to claim what was never theirs. 3 days after the lavish retirement party, Maxwell Donovan vanished. It was a disappearance so complete and methodical that it left even the most seasoned colleagues at Portland National Bank scrambling for answers. There was no note, no call, no farewell. It was as if he had evaporated into the city's fabric, leaving behind only the illusion of a life that had been meticulously erased. By morning, the bank's entire personnel file on him, encompassing 40 years of service, commendations, internal memos, and personal achievements, had been wiped clean with a precision that suggested an intimate knowledge of the system's inner workings, a knowledge Maxwell possessed in abundance. Joint accounts that once held millions were suddenly barren, leaving his family grasping at air and illusions alike. Vivian's credit cards, long assumed secure, were declined in boutique stores, forcing her to confront the first tangible sign that their carefully constructed lives were collapsing. To the outside world, Maxwell's disappearance seemed simple, a man stepping off the grid, but in reality, he had simply moved into the next phase of his long, quiet strategy, relocating to a secure apartment among the 7 properties he owned under the umbrella of shell companies, each selected with the precision of a chess player, planning endgame scenarios years in advance. In this new sanctum, Maxwell's presence was as commanding as it had ever been, though his posture remained relaxed, almost unassuming. 3 wide monitors flickered to life before him, each displaying a live feed that captured the panic, confusion, and frantic scrambling of the very family who had assumed mastery over his life. Vivian paced the kitchen of their once shared home, screaming into her phone with disbelief as account after account yielded error messages she could not fathom. Preston sat in his car, hunched and fuming, furiously texting former colleagues and attempting to access funds he no longer controlled, his arrogance replaced by the raw tension of impotence. Natalie, meanwhile, was at her office, expression taut, headset pressed to her ear, trying every legal and financial channel she had cultivated over decades to regain control of the life she had assumed she could inherit without effort. Every digital move they made, every desperate attempt to reclaim wealth or reputation, was quietly intercepted and cataloged by Maxwell's sophisticated systems, the product of years of intelligence training, financial acumen, and meticulous planning. From his secluded vantage, Maxwell began the second stage of his operation, activating the first of the many measures that would systematically dismantle the lives of those who had betrayed him. He opened a secure folder, labeled simply Checkmate, a title that held both personal satisfaction and the precision of inevitability. Inside were hundreds of files, each meticulously compiled, cross-referenced, and authenticated to withstand scrutiny, each piece a testament to the years he had spent gathering evidence against the people who had believed themselves untouchable. His first target was Bernard Holloway, the man who had been both confidant and conspirator, whose casual manipulation of assets and trust had made him a central figure in the betrayal. Maxwell composed an anonymous email, precise and cold, detailing Bernard's fraudulent client accounts, misappropriated investments, and offshore laundering, attaching incontrovertible evidence that left no room for argument. Bernard's signature appeared on every falsified document, creating a trail that was as damning as it was undeniable. The second strike targeted Preston, whose embezzlement had been carefully documented over the years, tracing funds siphoned from company accounts to cover gambling debts and personal indulgences. Maxwell sent a meticulously organized packet directly to Preston's employer, a quiet but devastating disclosure that would trigger investigations and force accountability for the reckless indulgences that had been hidden under the guise of paternal privilege. The third strike was aimed at Natalie, whose professional ascent in the legal world had been marred by deliberate suppression of exculpatory evidence. Maxwell uploaded exhaustive case files, court transcripts, and time-stamped correspondence to the State Bar Association, ensuring that her ethical violations could no longer be dismissed or rationalized. Every piece of evidence was cross-referenced, time-stamped, and corroborated, leaving no possibility for plausible deniability. Maxwell's finger hovered over the send button, as if savoring the inevitability of the unfolding consequences, then pressed it with the calm detachment of a man executing the final steps of a plan he had spent more than a decade perfecting. Within 24 hours, the effects of his actions rippled through the lives of those who had believed themselves secure. Bernard Holloway's office was swarmed by federal auditors, a meticulously timed visit orchestrated to coincide with the first wave of chaos. Reporters, tipped off by his increasingly flustered secretary, arrived to capture the spectacle, documenting the unraveling of a man once deemed untouchable in Portland's financial elite. Bernard, pale and sweating, was photographed leaving his office, refusing to answer questions, each frame of the shutter capturing the collapse of a carefully curated reputation. Preston faced his own reckoning within hours, a formal suspension from his company, followed by an onslaught of inquiries and demands for accountability, the previous assurances of wealth and inheritance evaporating in the face of verified evidence. His phone became a conduit for relentless messages from creditors, a reminder that wealth without prudence and legality was ephemeral. Natalie, too, confronted the consequences of her actions. She was summoned to an emergency state bar hearing, compelled to answer for the deliberate obfuscation of justice in cases where her ambition had overridden ethics. Documents she had assumed were long buried, now resurfaced in meticulously compiled form, her previous confidence and control eroding with each slide presented to the committee. Vivian, once the orchestrator of seduction and manipulation, faced quiet devastation in her own home. A second mortgage on the family estate, overdue payments, and financial commitments she had not anticipated, all orchestrated by the same meticulous hand she had underestimated. By the late afternoon, the three gathered in the living room, the air heavy with panic, confusion, and anger, the carefully constructed lives they had believed unassailable now crumbling around them. Each glance between them carried disbelief. Each word faltered as they struggled to comprehend the scope of the reckoning that had been executed with surgical precision. Maxwell had anticipated their disbelief, their attempts to rationalize, to blame coincidence or coincidence alone. The truth was far more controlled and deliberate. He had been observing for 15 years, cataloging every misstep, every betrayal, every moment of arrogance and overconfidence that would now form the bedrock of their downfall. While they believed he had been predictable, while they assumed that their schemes would unfold unnoticed, Maxwell had orchestrated the ultimate demonstration of strategy and patience. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that he was several steps ahead was not born of malice, but of the certainty that justice, in its most precise and elegant form, had been served. When he initiated the communications that would bring federal authorities, employers, and bar associations into play, it was with the awareness that each response would unfold exactly as anticipated, leaving no room for improvisation or escape. Maxwell's prior life in military intelligence, where patience, observation, and timing were the difference between success and failure, had converged seamlessly with his financial expertise. He had transformed betrayal into a meticulous exercise of foresight and control, leveraging his knowledge, skills, and planning to ensure that those who had sought to destroy him would instead become architects of their own ruin. The unfolding chaos among his family was mirrored by a detached, almost meditative calm in Maxwell himself. He monitored each reaction, noting the subtle changes in posture, the nervous gestures, the rising panic that accompanied the realization that they had misjudged him for decades. Preston's aggressive attempts at intervention were thwarted at every turn, digital dead ends blocking his access, security protocols impossible to breach, his usual confidence replaced by the hollow terror of impotence. Natalie's legal maneuvering proved equally futile, each request met with meticulously maintained barriers, every trace of Maxwell's new financial infrastructure obscured from even the most determined search. Vivian's panic was more profound, the realization of miscalculated control leaving her frozen, her mind unable to process that the very man she had sought to manipulate had been several moves ahead the entire time. Maxwell's calm, the serene posture, the unbroken gaze at his monitors contrasted starkly with the chaos he observed, a living demonstration of the efficacy of patience, preparation, and disciplined foresight. By evening, the final steps of Maxwell's orchestration began to unfold, subtle but inexorable. Each revelation, each exposure was timed with precision to ensure maximum impact, the cascading effects dismantling not just financial stability, but reputations, careers, and personal illusions of control. He watched as Bernard Holloway's credibility crumbled, Preston's arrogance dissolved into despair, and Natalie's polished veneer of legal authority fractured irreparably. Vivian, confronted with both financial ruin and undeniable proof of her long-term infidelity, was left with nothing but the stark realization of the man she had attempted to deceive. Maxwell's plan had required no violence, no confrontation, no public displays of anger. Its power lay in patience, precision, and the meticulous alignment of cause and consequence. Every element of the past 15 years had been designed to lead to this moment, a reckoning executed not in the heat of emotion, but with the deliberate control of a strategist who had anticipated every variable, every potential countermeasure, and every weakness in those who had believed themselves superior. By the time darkness settled over Portland, Maxwell Donovan remained absent. His presence felt only in the immutable consequences of his actions. From a secure apartment, surrounded by the quiet hum of digital monitoring and the serene assurance of financial invisibility, he observed, measured, and waited, knowing that each reaction, each misstep by those who had once betrayed him, would unfold exactly as he had planned. The first stage of retribution had been executed flawlessly. The foundations had been shaken, and the cascade of accountability, exposure, and ruin had begun. Maxwell, in complete composure, understood that this was the moment where patience, preparation, and unwavering discipline met opportunity, and that the true depth of his strategy would continue to reveal itself over the coming days, weeks, and months, leaving no corner of deceit unexamined, no shadow of treachery unilluminated, and no avenue of escape for those who had assumed control over a life that was never theirs to claim. As the days unfolded, Maxwell Donovan watched the reverberations of his calculated plan sweep through the lives of those who had believed themselves untouchable, a silent architect orchestrating the collapse of a family that had underestimated the measure of patience, intelligence, and foresight. Each revelation unfolded like a scene in a play he had directed from behind the curtain, the actors moving in perfect synchrony with the design he had spent 15 years constructing. Bernard Holloway's world disintegrated first, a cascade of legal notices, regulatory scrutiny, and public exposure leaving him pale and trembling. The once confident financial advisor now reduced to frantic phone calls, panicked meetings, and desperate attempts to salvage a reputation that had evaporated overnight. Maxwell's recordings, emails, and meticulously documented evidence of fraud had left Bernard no room to maneuver. Every argument dissolved under the weight of proof. Preston Donovan, whose arrogance had masked years of embezzlement and reckless indulgence, found his empire of entitlement crumbling. His employer, armed with precise documentation of financial misdeeds, enforced a suspension, freezing his access to accounts and triggering creditor inquiries that he could not evade. The smug, cocky son who had mocked his father in the glow of retirement festivities now sat in stunned disbelief, the foundations of his assumed security collapsing, leaving him with nothing but raw exposure and the stark reality of accountability. Natalie, whose ambition had carried her through high-profile legal cases and impressive professional achievements, faced public disgrace and permanent disbarment. Her every prior success reframed as the product of manipulation, unethical behavior, and deliberate suppression of exculpatory evidence. Maxwell had anticipated every potential loophole, every legal argument she might deploy, compiling a trail of time-stamped evidence so meticulous that even the most experienced lawyers could not contest it. As her professional world imploded, the veneer of sophistication and control she had worn for years was stripped away, leaving only the realization that her perceived superiority had been an illusion, one carefully cultivated for Maxwell's eventual demonstration of inevitable justice. Vivian Donovan experienced her reckoning differently, but no less devastatingly. From the comfort of her once secure home, she confronted the first tangible manifestations of Maxwell's orchestration: frozen joint accounts, unpaid mortgages she had believed were fully under her control, and the undeniable evidence of her long-term affair with Bernard Holloway. Each digital alert, each notice, each failed financial transaction was a hammer striking her carefully constructed reality, dismantling her illusions one precise blow at a time. Maxwell had known that the psychological impact of exposure and helplessness would be as potent as financial ruin. The erosion of perceived control, the shattering of arrogance, and the sudden recognition of vulnerability were elements he had woven into the final stages of his strategy. When the three gathered under the same roof, the air was thick with panic, disbelief, and frustration. Maxwell's long game had forced them to confront the reality of their miscalculations, that the man they had assumed predictable, soft, and easily manipulated had spent years observing, calculating, and preparing for the very moment they sought to exploit him. Their attempts to rationalize or assign blame to coincidence or chance were futile. The web of preparation was too intricate, too deliberate, and too immovable. Maxwell's absence became a presence itself, a constant reminder of the futility of arrogance and betrayal, the silent weight of a strategy executed with precision and forethought. Each member of his family was left to face the consequences of choices made in selfishness and deception. Each moment of exposure, a reflection of the patience and intelligence they had disregarded. The culmination of Maxwell's plan arrived at the Grand Crest Hotel, a location chosen for its symbolic neutrality and public visibility. The Donovans arrived expecting a resolution of their financial entanglements, assuming that Maxwell's disappearance had signaled their victory, or at least a standoff from which they could negotiate. Instead, they were met with a room filled not with attorneys or mediators, but with reporters. Cameras flashing and federal investigators quietly observing, the atmosphere charged with revelation and anticipation. As the projector flickered to life, detailed documents, Emails, financial records, and scanned legal papers illuminated the screen, each exposing the breadth of Vivian's manipulations, Bernard's fraud, Preston's embezzlement, and Natalie's ethical violations. The room, once expected to mediate a settlement, became a theater of accountability, each family member forced into confrontation with irrefutable evidence, every attempt to flee or obscure reality blocked by Maxwell's foresight and the strategic placement of personnel and technology. Vivian, desperate and flustered, could only watch as her own signature on unauthorized documents appeared in full view of reporters and investigators alike, the weight of Maxwell's meticulous preparation rendering her protests impotent. Preston, attempting to assert authority or control, found his every move anticipated, blocked, and documented. Natalie, stripped of professional defenses, faced undeniable exposure as evidence of suppressed exculpatory materials and case manipulation was displayed for public and legal scrutiny, her previous accomplishments reframed as complicit acts of deception. Maxwell's pre-recorded message filled the room, his calm, deliberate voice narrating the events as they had unfolded, explaining his patient strategy and revealing the extent to which their arrogance had blinded them to the intelligence, discipline, and foresight he had cultivated over decades. Each word reinforced the inevitability of their downfall, the precision with which he had orchestrated the collapse, and the complete absence of chance in their unraveling. Even as the camera lights flashed and the investigators methodically documented each detail, Maxwell Donovan remained absent, his presence manifested only through the consequences he had engineered. Every legal inquiry, regulatory action, and public revelation was executed with his unseen hand, each ripple through their lives a calculated reminder of the power of preparation, discipline, and measured response. Federal authorities moved swiftly. Bernard Holloway was engulfed by regulatory investigations. Preston faced legal suspension and the onset of criminal accountability, and Natalie's disbarment became final. Her once promising career obliterated. Vivian, confronted with financial ruin, public disgrace, and incontrovertible proof of her betrayal, found herself isolated. Her previous social standing and influence evaporated under the weight of Maxwell's strategy. The magnitude of their collective downfall was as much a psychological collapse as it was financial, a precise orchestration of exposure and consequence that left no avenue of escape, no potential for rationalization, and no place to hide. Maxwell's patient observation, meticulous documentation, and disciplined execution had transformed betrayal into a system of accountability, each action timed and positioned for maximum effect, leaving nothing to chance. Months later, Maxwell Donovan was no longer a presence in Portland, having relocated to a private beach in Bali, where turquoise waves lapped gently against the shore, sunlight shimmering over the serene horizon. The world he had meticulously monitored continued to unfold without his intervention, each legal proceeding, regulatory inquiry, and professional judgment progressing exactly as he had anticipated. Maxwell's role had been to set the pieces in motion. The mechanisms of justice, exposure, and consequence now operated independently, guided by the evidence, the law, and the structured collapse he had orchestrated. Seated under the shade of a palm tree, a tablet on a small wooden table, Maxwell observed the occasional headlines flashing updates on the continuing legal fallout of his family's choices, though he scarcely needed them. He had anticipated every development, designed each system to operate autonomously, and in doing so, freed himself from the weight of retaliation, anger, or active engagement. His phone buzzed, the secure line displaying the name of his brother, Raymond. Maxwell answered calmly, listening as Raymond inquired if he would return for the final stages of sentencing. Maxwell, considering the years of preparation and the measured execution of his strategy, responded simply, "No, I've given them enough of my life already." The pause that followed carried a lifetime of understanding. of patience, and of observation. Maxwell had learned that the ultimate freedom came not from vengeance, but from the detachment, discipline, and insight that allowed him to act with certainty and to observe without attachment. In the quiet moments that followed, Maxwell opened his laptop one final time, observing a single program still running that monitored the digital presence and activity of his former family. His finger hovered over the delete key, a symbolic finality to a decade and a half of preparation, before pressing it. The screen went dark, the last tether to his past severed, and for the first time in years, Maxwell Donovan felt a true liberation, a freedom untainted by betrayal, manipulation, or expectation. He had transformed personal treachery into a testament of discipline, foresight, and intelligence, proving that patience and preparation were the most powerful tools in confronting betrayal. Some losses take everything from us. Others, like Maxwell's, leave exactly what is needed: the clarity, the knowledge, and the freedom that only comes when the game has been played to perfection, and the checkmate, long prepared, is finally revealed. In that moment, beneath the palm trees and beside the gentle, endless waves, Maxwell understood that some betrayals try to take everything, but in the quiet mastery of patience, vigilance, and strategic action, they leave you with precisely what you were always meant to retain: control, freedom, and the profound certainty of justice served.